We're in the midst of a huge transformation where our peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I am the Senior Partnerships Manager at AllVoices. Today, I am very excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Colin Mincy. He is the Chief People Officer at Human Rights Watch. Colin, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns, and when you were younger, how did you answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Sure. Thank you, Christina. It's so good to be with you. I happen to be a listener of the podcast, so to be asked to actually broadcast with you is a real honor. So I am Colin Mincy. My pronouns are he, him. I am the Chief People Officer at Human Rights Watch, and we are a 500-person led human rights organization. We report and advocate for human rights for people around the world. And we have a presence in 90 countries, and I'm really privileged to be able to lead a team of dedicated HR professionals as we support these really committed human rights trailblazers. So my evolution into human resources is a less traditional one. I wanted desperately to be a real estate agent or banker growing up. And so
Very different.
while folks while folks wanted to be teachers and nurses and doctors and lawyers at a very young age, even as a toddler, that's sort of where my focus was. And I think that has a lot to do with the relationships that banks and real estate agents had in small communities at the time. And so I very much wanted to emulate that when I grew up. I went to a business specialty school called Bryant University. I also, started an internship at JP Morgan where I really got into banking. And then I realized pretty early on, with no offense to anyone who's listening, who's gone into banking, that it just wasn't for me. And I transitioned to HR with the help of a mentor, and I have been in the space ever since. And I tried to marry my love for banking and my love for people by working in financial services for the first part of my career. I spent about 13 years in the private sector before heading over to the NGO space.
I love it. I love it. I think that is an interesting trajectory as well. And just like a lot of kind of reflection, kind of where you want to be. And I think working at such a purpose-driven organization is absolutely incredible. And I have a lot of questions about the day-to-day, the strategy, and your perspective with all of your holistic experiences. But before we get into it, what defines you, Colin?
Probably three things, because I think we have an allotted amount of time, so I won't go into them all. But I would say relationships is something that is a real driver for me. Personally, I'm an only child, and I think that only children, despite all of the terrible associations about being spoiled and whatnot, the thing that I think people forget about only children is that we have to really work to cultivate relationships. We don't have siblings growing up, and so what we pour into relationships and friendships, I think, are particularly meaningful. And I think that's helped. It's helped me create a really phenomenal and dynamic and supportive circle and community around me. But it's also helped in my profession, my ability to actively listen and understand people, and use that to be an influencer, to be a mentor, to support people in their needs and in their time of need. I think that's worked and carried me really far, both in my life and in my profession. Being of service to others is a very big part of my life, and that's not just in my role, working for an NGO as large and influential as Human Rights Watch, but it's also, my private life. I am the chair of the board of directors for the Workforce Professionals Training Institute, which provides workforce development program training for people who want to experience the dignity of work in New York City. And I also am on the board of Youth Represent, which is a organization that provides legal support and legal advocacy for young people who are caught up in the criminal system at early ages and want to re-enter society and not be uh, uh, constrained by mistakes that they made as young people, and so being of service to others is for me fuel. It keeps me going. It's something that I find inspiring. It reminds me how fortunate I am to be where I'm at and be in the position I'm in, and it also is really a call to action of that, of the saying that of much is given, much is expected. And then I think the uh, third leg of that stool is work ethic. I am a worker. I don't know what to do when I'm not working, and I have to be very intentional about how I spend my downtime because I'm not very good at work-life balance. I'm good at preaching it to other people, but I'm
Yeah.
not good in theory about practicing it myself. So I would say relationships, service, and working hard. Going to start working smarter in 2022 are the three things that probably define me the best.
Well, those are three great things. It sounds like you really live your values inside and outside of work. And as a fellow only child as well, I like to reframe around us as people too, in terms of really maintaining those relationships, seeking them out, and cultivating them too. In terms of intentionality, I was reading through your bio, and you were the first chief people officer at an organization. And I think that
Yeah.
is really challenging role for anyone jumping into the role, being the first people leader when startups are building out their team. You don't have people yet, so you don't have someone in a people leader function. But when you are in that role, how do you prioritize how to grow your team and bring on subject matter experts and be a team of one handling so much, especially as the team continue to scale?
Yeah, so I inherited a team when I came into Human
Okay.
Rights Watch. So prior to my arrival, there were the HR lead position was at the director level. So there was a team in place at Human Rights Watch, and boy, let me tell you, this is a really wonderful team, and so I have added members to the team, but there was an infrastructure in place when I arrived. The the significance, Christina, of being the first chief people officer is that the organization recognized that it was important to elevate the role because of the moment that the organization which was in. I think the organization recognized that it needed to do something more than just talking about the importance of diversity, equity, inclusion,
Right.
that given the nature of the work, how hard people work, and how difficult and complex the world is, that stress and resilience and taking care of people who are taking care of the world
Yeah.
is that we really needed to focus on. And then the organization had gone through, a difficult period where it was clear that being consistent about transparency and accountability and in how people work, how people behave, how people work together was important. And so those things I think contributed to, I believe, the very wise decision to give a seat at the executive leadership table to a chief people officer. And it's an honor just to be a part of the Human Rights Watch family, but it's also an honor that I don't take for granted that I'm the first person to be in the seat. And what it's meant is, you know, um, you know, at a time where we're all managing through a pandemic for the first time as an organization, I've been able to help construct how we support colleagues in this moment, at a time both in the US and around the world where racial justice and social justice is at the core of where we're trying to go, and recognizing all of the places we've been, being able to be a black man, in a seat of this importance, to help shape how we respond as an organization, and meet the moment, not just for our colleagues, but for the importance of our work. It's it probably was not on the radar of the person who I think really fought hard to elevate the role, but it sure was the right timing, and we're working hard to make sure that we demonstrate that it was the right decision.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're right in terms of kind of the role of the chief people officer being on the executive team makes a huge difference in terms of decision making and the impact you have on the organization and just the strategy of the company as all to be a strategic partner at the table and be proactive. Can you share for our listeners kind of some of the decisions you've had impact on over the past year or 2 years, or kind of looking ahead as well, whatever you prefer?
Yeah, so thanks for that. Look, you know, it is easy uh, to concentrate and focus so heavily on the work that sometimes the needs of the people get lost, sort of in translation. And I think my job is not only to make sure that the people perspective is front and center in decisions that affect them, but it's really also been about cultivating relationships with some of our employee-led groups to make sure that the voice of the employee is doesn't necessarily make decisions, but it certainly should inform them. And so I've done a lot of work, which I would have needed to do anyway as a new person to the organization, trying to sort of understand who people are and all of the wonderful things that they do. The biggest example is the way that we supported staff during the pandemic, and the development of policies like allowing folks to take reduced schedules so that they can balance the needs of work and home life,
Mhm.
taking care of children who aren't in school, people who are taking care of aged parents or relatives or community members who don't have programs to go to as a result of everything shutting down. Providing reimbursements, for supplemental expenses that people have, like childcare, so that people could continue working. Those are things and ways that we supported people. Elevating our principles around managing with stress and resilience, and ensuring that people understood that it's okay to raise your hand and say that you need help, that it's okay not to be at 100% of the time. Looking at how we bring employees along on our decision making journey, so we're transparent about the things that we're working on and why we've made the decisions we've made, and really strengthening and building a cadence around how management and employees can healthily engage. Those are just a few examples, I think, of the role that I try to play. And I don't always get it right, but I think if you talk to people who work with me, they would tell you that my heart is in the right place, and that I do my best to try to negotiate mutually beneficial outcomes for different sets of people with different sets of priorities. And I think by working that way, we build a lot of bridges together, and that's, I think, important in ensuring that we're working in and cultivating a thriving community.
I love it. Cultivating a thriving community, taking care of folks' mental and physical well being, recognizing that people are full folks inside and outside of work too. You mentioned kind of caretakers and working parents, and just having the flexibility to have these conversations at work is really
Yes.
important. And you also, I like the word of the kind of the journey too, because it's not like if you do these three things and you stop, having conversations around caretaking, or you stop talking about mental well-being too. And I want to ask, we discussed this a little bit on our kind of pre-call conversation,
Yeah.
but in terms of acknowledging where Human Rights Watch is on their kind of equity and inclusion journey, can you tell us about kind of a current state and an aspirational state from your perspective?
Yeah. So look, we're not where we should be, period. Right. But I will tell you that one of the things that really makes me proud to be a part of the Human Rights Watch community is that our staff, who are people who have dedicated and committed their lives, they're smart people. They could have done anything, but they chose to sort of step into the moment and commit themselves to making sure that people who don't have voices and people whose stories need to be told have a space and a vehicle to do so. They want to work at an organization whose lives its values on the inside that it extols on the outside. And in a very impactful way, I think has helped shepherd the organization to a reckoning around how we can build a more diverse set of representation among our colleagues. I mean, um, we are diverse in terms of representation, but we have to go further than representation. We have to make sure that regardless of what faith you practice, or what country you come from, or what your ethnic background is, or even your the economic hardships that you faced in life. The question is, are the things that differentiate us, is there a space for uh, all of those differences to feel respected, feel valued, feel included, feel invested in, feel supported, experience work the same way? Are they do they have access to opportunity, to mobilization, to training, to mentorship, this in similar ways? And so we're a diverse group of folks, but we need to work on making sure that the Human Rights Watch experience is felt the same by the different demographics that define us and that we're represented by. And then we need to make sure that at the core of our policies and practice is equity.
Mhm.
And so those are the things that we're really focused on. We have a new DEI director. Her name is Colin, and she just started a few weeks ago. She's incredible. I know she's going to be a terrific partner. We have an amazing DEI task force, which is an employee-led, employee-staffed group that's been in place for a while. That's really been driving home the importance of the organization really acting and mobilizing around principles of DEI. We've just, for the first time, embedded managing with DEI principles and managing with stress and resilience as part of our Managing for Excellence program. So we made, we have mandatory training for managers around how they can show up and practically operationalize DEI in their own
Yeah.
working experiences. We have a race rights and colonialism group that's bringing in outside speakers and thought leaders um, around white saviorism and other things that I think are important things for the NGO sector to be talking about as
Absolutely.
to be different. And so there's a lot going on. We're working diligently to bring all of these things together. And at the end of the day, we want people, regardless of who they are, where they come from, what side of the house they work on,
Mhm.
where they live, to feel that this is a place for them and that they're respected and valued, and we won't stop until that comes to pass.
Yeah, absolutely. And these are long-term sustainable goals, changes that happen overnight, and acknowledging where we are and what we're doing is really important to doing this work. And
Yes.
recognizing, yeah, this is not a destination and we're on a journey. Are there qualitative and quantitative ways you measure company culture and just progress towards these equity goals as well?
Look, I so I I think so part of me feels like we have to start somewhere, right?
Right.
And I think where organizations get it wrong is that um they choose looking for perfection over acknowledging and recognizing the short wins.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really bad mistake, because in order to really be clear about where you're going, you have to really understand where you've come from. And
Mhm.
so measurement, right, becomes a big part of this. And measuring where you are, um, having clearly defined goals and realistic benchmarks on where you can go gradually, and having honest, um, and tangible evidence and outcomes that you've made it is really the only sure way that I think that you can move the needle.
Mhm.
And we've mistakenly spent so much time on thinking that bringing in diverse people is the end of the line, that we're really looking at, at measurement, and belonging, and the things that happen to keep diverse populations and to engage diverse populations as our strategy for long-term success. So we're still building it. We haven't perfected it. Um, but the good news about not being first, Christina, is there's plenty of evidence on the ways to do it and the ways not to do it, and we're taking those lessons to heart when we think about charting our own path on this journey.
Absolutely. There are a lot of organizations doing this work and committing and at different parts of their kind of equity kind of reflection, as well as leaders and as people too in general in their professional and personal lives. I want to ask in your kind of opinion too, based on your kind of, you know, experience as well. I know you're in the NGO space at Human Rights Watch, but do you think that right now it is an imperative that organizations in the public or private sector really engage in social justice, racial justice work, whatever that means to them in their journey, whether that's having these conversations and really acknowledging kind of what's happening in the world today.
Yeah, I really love this question. I've been so well behaved the whole broadcast that I'm just gonna get into a little bit of trouble because I kind of enjoy that. So
I'm
I've
here
worked.
for it.
Yeah, well, you can't stop me. It's too late. So, I've had the benefit of working in the private sector, right? And now I've been sort of in this NGO, human rights ecosystem since 2013. And I was an intern at JP Morgan in 1999, right? And DEI and being the employer of choice was a huge, intentional, large scale initiative. And it's now 2022 and we're still having the same conversations. And the point actually is, I'm not shading JP Morgan. I think that they've done amazing work and have been sort of pioneers in the financial service space in this regard. And I have enormous respect for they're advancing Black pathways. They've done marvelous work. The point I'm making is that I think that people assume that because organizations are in this space of advocating for social justice and racial justice and all of these important and LGBT rights and all of these things, I think they assume that we're much further down the lane than some of these financial services institutions. And if we actually want to be truthful,
Mhm.
because we're not. And I think that Black Lives Matter and some of the other movements that really have taken off is a demonstration that organizations who have this deep knowledge about these issues better start living what they're preaching,
Mhm.
or we're going to miss the moment, and perhaps worse, lose the credibility to be able to stand on the soapbox and wave our fingers and preach about what should be happening. And so that's why this living our values thing is so important.
Mhm.
Um, but it takes everyone working together, whether you're at Goldman or you're at Google, uh,
Mhm.
to really take part about and start in your own backyard of having conversations, creating spaces for safe conversations to hear from your employees about their lived experience, about how um, how these conversations and these topics affect them based on what's happened to them personally, about what's happened to them in the workforce, what's happened to them since they've been under your roof and on your payroll.
Yeah.
And, and learn from those individuals, listen to those individuals, elevate their stories and their voices, and turn that into practical, actionable things that your organization can do, to build a stronger community, so that when you go out and recruit, there are greater numbers of diverse populations of people from different backgrounds who want to come to your organization because they've heard that it's a safe, supportive, nurturing, and respectful community. And then we could stop looking around and wondering why people aren't coming to our organization. They're not coming to your organization because they've heard that it's not always a safe place for people to go, or they've heard stories that are difficult, or they're going and recruiting or being recruited by organizations that have done this well.
Mm-hmm. There are psychologically safe organizations out there, and you
Yes,
need to proactively make sure you're fostering that at your organization too. And if your people are going to tell you, they're going to tell their friends, they're going to tell their family, and it's not going to be a secret of what the company culture is going to
that's
be
right.
like. And I want to touch on your point too in terms of how you keep a pulse on what's happening to employees while they're on your payroll, while they're under your roof. How do you see kind of that employee feedback manifesting at Human Rights Watch, and really, employee feedback management as a tool to continually build that culture of trust and listening and psychological safety?
Yes, it's when you look at Yelp reviews, people typically don't bother talking about how great their meal is. It's usually that horrendous experience that really takes flight. It's the same thing about the employee experience. A bad a bad experience as a manager, a employee who is not selected for an opportunity because the process wasn't transparent or fair. Those stories have legs, and they live on. And so the best thing to do is to stop them from happening, and make sure that equity and transparency and the things that people can talk positively about your organization are alive and well.
Yeah, absolutely. Get ahead of it. Get ahead of it. Actively listen, ask these questions, and really listen to the answers there. Do you think, I mean, we're talking about people feeling respected, really having that psychological safety, table stakes here. One of the phrases that people use for work is like, we want you to be able to bring your full self to work. Do you think that's possible and it should be a goal for organizations?
This is a tricky question. Part of working for a global organization like Human Rights Watch is that there are people from different parts of the world, and there are different cultures and different interpretations of what work should be, what being professional should be. And
Yeah.
so culturally, not everyone is comfortable bringing their full self to work, or feels that bringing their full self to work is even appropriate. I think people should approach how they want to be experienced and defined at work based on their own experiences.
Mhm.
Um, what what you want to actively do is make sure that there aren't things in place or in play in the work community that impede those who want to bring their full self
That's
from
it.
them. And that, I think, is what we're trying to work on. And um and that's why having conversations about cultural differences in safe and respectful ways, learning from one another in safe and respectful ways, creating opportunities for people who are not routinely in each other's orbit, um, in safe and respectful ways, bringing people from different parts of the world together, to work on projects who ordinarily wouldn't work together in safe and respectful ways. That helps tear some of those walls and some of that separation down. And I think just basic human psychology, we are curious about people,
Right.
and I think that organizations have to harness that curiosity in innovative ways and use that to help foster a sense of community, particularly in global organizations where you have people coming from different parts of the world, where DEI means different things, where communication is different,
Yeah.
where the relationship between a manager and employee and those power dynamics are different. If you are in an organization that has a one size fits all solution, trying to operate in a global context, they're not doing it correctly. Tell them this podcast.
It's not a one size fits all world that we are living in. I appreciate that common language and framework you talked about too. Diversity, equity,
Yes.
inclusion means different things in different parts of the world, and you need to have conversations around that and really speaking to one another. I definitely agree with you in terms of people who want to bring their full selves to work should be able to, but you should also have that comfort, not have the barriers up to continuously be on that journey to share what you
Yeah.
want with your manager, build that trust and not come in day one and share everything. Is that realistic? Probably not.
Yeah, you know what else is and I think this is really important, and I'm not saying this to suggest that people should not be held accountable um for the ways in which they make people uncomfortable or they make people
Absolutely.
valued. But part of being on this part of this process means that we have to give grace to people who make mistakes, who don't know better.
Mhm.
And we can't cancel everyone who doesn't say the right thing or doesn't know to say the right thing. I think we have to balance the opportunity where people say something or message something or frame something in ways that could be hurtful, and use that as a learning opportunity to make sure that people understand why you can't suggest that intentionally focusing on diverse candidates means you're sacrificing quality. Why that's a terrible thing, an untruthful and terrible thing to say. We have to be able to use moments like this as moments of reflection, moments of education, and hope that that helps people gain greater levels of understanding about what it means to operate and work in good faith in sort of a pro DEI environment. Um, Now, people who don't want to grow and don't want to learn and don't want to be told why their language and things are problematic, we can't help those people. Um, and that's where leadership teams and HR teams need to have conversations about um, what we do about people who don't want to change,
Yeah.
and people who don't want to be helped.
Mhm.
And in this moment, having people um, who are harmful and who consistently are hurtful, whether there's a place in your organization for people who show up that way. Because employees are watching. They're watching what we're doing, and they're watching what we're not doing. And this is a moment of growth and a moment of learning for everyone. But we've got to start with grace. But even grace has its limitations. Without grace becomes it becomes quite limited, and then we get into some of the more unpleasant things. But I wanted to make that point that we're not going to get there overnight, and so to the extent that people want to grow, we should afford them grace.
Showing yourself, showing others grace, empathy, compassion is really important. And I think having those mutual intentions, the intention versus impact conversation, I think is relevant too. So I definitely agree with you there as well. In terms of, you mentioned the role of leaders and HR teams. From your perspective, is there a must-have that the next generation of people leaders, whether you are directly in the people function or you are a people manager, need to have in order to be successful. And what I mean by that is grow their team, motivate folks, and really be strong leaders.
100%. Yes. I wish I said it that succinctly.
No, absolutely, absolutely. Is there any kind of myths that you want to debunk around kind of being a chief people officer for folks who don't work directly with a CPO on a day-to-day basis?
Listen, I don't know that I've fully mastered my role to really be able to answer that question, but I will tell you that I think being a human resources professional in this moment is probably one of the hardest periods of time um, where HR folks are met with incredible challenge, and there aren't a lot of solutions. There aren't a lot of um, uh, there's not a lot of history and experience to draw from, and so this is a space we've had to be innovative. We've had to be nimble, um, but it's also a space where organizations have turned to HR for help.
Right.
And the interesting thing is we've delivered. And I've talked to a lot of my colleagues in a lot of different industries, in organizations unlike HRW, where HR has got a seat at the table, where because the organization was in peril, because the organization didn't know what to do, they turned to HR. HR stepped up, and I just hope in this moment we don't lose the impact that getting HR into that room to help come up with a plan to support the people. I hope we don't lose that.
Right.
I hope we don't lose the intentionality we have to bring to onboarding employees in a remote universe, and the care we take in making sure that people get set up with the right people, and that we're thoughtful about getting people their equipment and other things on time. There are few silver linings in this moment that we've been in, but the one thing I am excited about is that organizations have seen the real value of HR when it is leveraged before the barn is on fire, and when it is consulted, and when the organization doesn't know what to do, and HR wills itself to sort of be that shelter in a time of storm. And um, our jobs were not easy before the pandemic. They're particularly not easy now. There are elements of our job where we have to make difficult decisions. We have to have difficult conversations, and we can't always explain to people why we do them.
Right.
But we're not in this profession for power. We're not in this profession for praise. We're in this profession because we care about people, and we want to be helpful, and we want everyone who works in our organization to look back at their time with us and say, because I was an employee of Human Rights Watch, because I was an employee of the Save the Children or the International Rescue Committee, I am a better person. I'm a better professional, and I think that's what we're working really hard to do and striving to do at Human Rights Watch.
I think that's a huge marker of success when someone says, because I worked at Human Rights Watch, because I worked at AllVoices, I am a better person, better professional.
Yes.
As well. Colin, we talked about a lot in our time together, but is there anything I didn't ask that you want to share with folks who are listening, or a key takeaway? I want to pass the mic to you.
No, I can't believe we're out of time, but I shared from the heart what I think is important. And thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for this platform. Some of my good friends and former colleagues have appeared on this podcast, and I hope that people will continue listening, and that other HR thought leaders will continue contributing.
Thank you so much, Colin. I appreciate it. I really, really enjoyed our conversation here
Me too.
today, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you. Thank you for all the work you're doing as well.
Thank you, Christina.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in that employee feedback management as a requirement for the company to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.